Well, every time that we come together to celebrate the Holy Mass, we have to be reminded that from the perspective of Jesus, it's a prayer of thanksgiving. And so I suspect that every time that we come together, we have different things that we're grateful for. And I have to tell you that, praying over the scripture passages for today, I find myself very grateful for the opportunity that I had to be a part of Catholic school education. 24 years on the student side of the desk and 13 years on the teacher administrator side of the desk. And I was especially grateful for the opportunity that I had to teach seniors in high school. Because it was a way in which trying to challenge them to make real in their lives the faith that had been passed on to them by their parents, especially at baptism, and to somehow be able to embrace that faith as they were prepared to graduate. I taught a course on Christian lifestyles for a number of years, and it was so good to be able to see their minds and hearts open up to making real the faith that they were proclaiming with their lips. What made me think about the importance of Catholic school education in my life was a story that I was reading in preparation for today. It was a story of a student, not one of mine, but another student who had been given an assignment to take a look at the gospel that we've just heard today. And all the students in his particular class were called to reflect on one element of love about which Jesus taught that might not be so evident. And this particular student wrote his essay and said, "Love is more than just a feeling. It is a deliberate act of the will that takes over when the other is unlovable." Think about that for a moment. Love is more than a feeling. It is a deliberate act of the will that takes over when the other is unlovable. And so let's take a look at that from a couple of different perspectives. First of all, as we must do, go back to the scriptures. Because whether or not this young man recognized it or not, he was really rooted in the Judeo-Christian tradition about love. We take a look at that first passage that we heard today from the book of Exodus. And it's very clear that whenever God is trying to get through to his people, he's making them aware, or wants to make them aware of the fact that if he's going to be his people, then they can't decide to exclude anybody from their company. And he begins to take a look at various individuals whom the Hebrew people would have felt very comfortable excluding from their midst. Widows, orphans, aliens. And God is speaking to them in no uncertain terms about how they have to include them as members of their own family as well. And then we come to the gospel, and we find these experts in the law who are coming to pose a question to Jesus, but in a very special way to engage him at best in an academic discussion, and on the other side, maybe to trap him up in raising the question about, okay, Jesus, you claim to know the law. Which is the greatest of the laws? Now, we've got to have a little bit of a background here about what was motivating their question. At that particular time, the experts in the law were dividing the Torah, the Mosaic law, into two categories. The heavy-duty laws that really people had to live and to follow. And on the other side, the laws that were light, that one could say, well, I know about them, but I don't necessarily have to live it. And so what they were doing is taking a look at the 613 laws in the Mosaic tradition as they posed the question to Jesus. And really, Jesus comes back and he not only answers the question, knowing the Jewish law, you shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. And that's found in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6. But then he included something that came from the 19th chapter of Leviticus. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And what shocked the law experts, and Jesus' response was this. He said, when you're dealing with both of those laws, you're not dealing with a light law. And if you experts in the law think that the one is more important than the other, that it's a heavy law to be able to love God, but it's a light law to be able to love other people as yourself, then you got another thing coming. Because from the perspective of Jesus, he clearly says it, that both are heavy laws. Both are laws that cannot, in fact, be ignored. As he says at the very end, the whole law and the prophets depend on these two commandments. So there it is. The student whose reflection, we began our own reflection today, was really on to something. By taking a look at one aspect of the law that sometimes we don't think about, which is in fact the deliberate act of our will to love people in our lives that are unlovable. And I have to tell you that I spent a couple hours yesterday thinking about that in my own life. And I got to tell you, I started to do a checklist of people in my life right now who are hard for me to love. I'm embarrassed to tell you, it was 13 people. Began to think about them, about each one of them, and how it is so difficult for me to love them. And I suspect that you probably are in a position that you can recognize that as well too. And maybe that might be a good exercise today, to sit down in the quiet and take a look at who are those people that you find it hard to love. And I think that, when we take a look at our own personal lives, that probably happens like on maybe at least two levels. Think about you as married couples, or all of us as good friends or co-workers. Aren't there times that we get into maybe debates with each other, serious debates, and maybe debates that shift into arguments? And that sometimes even people that we normally love, that we find ourselves saying some of the ugliest things that we could say to each other. Words that you may speak to your spouses, or you may say to your children, or your children may say to you, or that we might in fact say to people who are our very best friends. And I think sometimes we walk away from those experiences and say, well, that's a sure sign of love, that we can speak to other people and that we can say what's really on our hearts. And even though sometimes we can say things that are ugly, it can in fact be something that speaks about the strength of that relationship. What we're talking about here, though, is the fact of what comes from maybe deep down within, that's not filled with love, that's filled with resentment or anger. And then there's that second category of people. Maybe people whose personalities make it difficult for us to love them. Or maybe people who have said things about us or done things against us that make us really resent them. And it seems to me that where this gospel today becomes real again for us is where it became real for those legal experts who tried to trap Jesus in today's gospel. To somehow to say, well, there's certain laws that are heavy-duty ones, and so obviously among them is coming to love the Lord. That's a critical one. But it's not so critical when you take a look at what it means to love others. And Jesus says, pals. It's critically important. It's a heavy law on both. Yes, to love the Lord our God with our whole heart, mind, and soul and strength, and to love each other as we love ourselves. And so today, my dear sisters and brothers, let's drink in the message of Jesus and take it seriously. Not let it go out of our hearts once this Mass is over, but to do a checklist. Who are those people in your life and my life right now that we don't love the way that we should? And we can't stop there either. We can't stop at simply putting their name down on a list, but we need to be able to ask God for the grace to melt our hearts and to love them too, as we would love people whom it is easy for us to love. I'm not sure where the experts in the law today were after they heard Jesus, because after all, their intention was to trip him up. But I certainly hope for them, what can be true for us, is that we will take Jesus' words to heart and begin to include in our hearts those people heretofore whom we've kept out of our hearts. And so now